Good morning and welcome. This is episode 9 of The Approach, our series at St. Christopher's, where we talk about the readings that are coming up for the Sunday about to happen. And I'm Father Chris Steele. I'm the pastor here. With us today is Father Jonathan Melton. He's the associate rector at Holy Trinity by the Lake in Heath. That's a mouthful. Did I get it right?
Oh, that's exactly it. Yeah.
Okay, good. And so for those of you who are joining us from elsewhere, Heath is, would you call it a suburb of Rockwall, which is a suburb of Dallas? How would you describe that?
Yeah, that's not too far off. I mean, as a kid, I remember my dad would drive us out to Rockwall before they filled. Well, he would tell us stories about like before the lake was filled in and stuff. And Heath is a little more country than Rockwall still. If you want to see bobcats, you go out to Heath.
Okay. Yeah, I live right by White Rock Lake, and so I have plenty of that anyway. So
Sure.
quite a lot of fun. So at Holy Trinity, so all of us have been dealing with COVID in our own way and reopening as best we can. And it looks like there's some light at the end of the tunnel for us. But how has worship been different for you guys out there? I know you've got a lot to do with we're all learning how to become TV producers on the fly and things like that. How have things changed?
Oh my goodness. I don't know if you have seen Father Keith or Father Chris on Facebook memories give us these little flashbacks to a year before, and like 3 days ago, I guess, was like our first online service, and you could see like pictures of me in a hoodie, bleary-eyed, with my daughter helping me like figure out Zoom for the first time in terms of a service. Keith, our rector, he was telling us recently, like I mean, if there's a silver lining for how long this has been, and it's been so exhausting for everybody, but we've tried just about everything. So it's it's not like there's been one way to do it. We've done them all. We've started with kind of a format like this, streamed to Facebook in the early days with like PowerPoint slides. Then we moved to pre-recorded services where I heard Mother Rebecca talking in one of your earlier episodes about preaching on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, and we certainly were there. And then doing a limited kind of pre-register in service, but also live streamed, and every configuration of it. So yeah, we've gotten to be pretty flexible and less rigid about our own understandings and ideas about what what constitutes real worship and all that.
Yeah, you're back in person now.
We have capacity for 60 on a Sunday, socially distant, and then we're still streaming. We also have an outdoor service in the afternoon where we're sitting on. We had Christmas on hay bales out in the field, so it felt very Christmassy. It felt appropriate for the season.
Right, we're right next to 75, so we tried outdoor services a couple of times, and those were they were worshipful and we were faithful, but from a technical standpoint, they were unmitigated disasters.
Oh, I
the first one I did when I got here, we had a chainsaw fire up just as I was starting my sermon. So it was the best sermon I've ever preached. Trust me, right? Well, we have gone back indoors. We were doing morning prayer, pre-recorded and sent out on Sunday morning. But since I've been here, we started outdoors, but now we're back inside, socially distant. One of the things we are doing, you'll see this as we get into our discussion, is we have been omitting the epistle, trying to stay inside for as little time as possible. And so I always feel like we don't get enough Old Testament, and so that's what we've been going with. And of course, today we got Jeremiah, which in morning prayer we've been motoring our way through, and you just gave a reflection on it for the clergy. Did it air yesterday? Was that it? Or, okay, right. My last one was last Friday. So we're all about Jeremiah. Well, why don't we go ahead and pray? And I'm going to open us with, since it is St. Patrick's Day, we'll open with the prayer of St. Patrick. Let us pray. Christ with me, Christ before me, Christ behind me, Christ in me, Christ beneath me, Christ above me, Christ on my right, Christ on my left, Christ when I lie down, Christ when I sit down, Christ when I arise, Christ in the heart of every man who thinks of me, Christ in the mouth of everyone who speaks to me, Christ in every eye that sees me, Christ in every ear that hears me. I arise today through the mighty strength, the invocation of the Trinity, through belief in the threeness, through confession of the oneness of the Creator of creation. Amen.
Amen.
All right. That's one of my favorite prayers, and it's one of my favorite hymns that we always sing around Trinity Sunday. So we'll look forward to that. And Becky's, remember that we all love that one. If we could pull it off, I would love to do it. It's kind of hard to do as a solo, though.
Yeah, how long? But it's a beautiful hymn.
Yes. Well, we'll make sure Wally gets a good breakfast that day. So we're starting. This is the 5th Sunday of Lent, and so this is the last really normal Sunday of Lent that we're about to do. And so we're in Jeremiah, and we're going to be in the Gospel of John down the way in just a moment. So, but why don't we take a look at the Jeremiah reading? This is from Jeremiah chapter 31. Father Melton, would you grace us with your dulcet tones and read that for us, please?
Sure. The days are surely coming, says the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. It will not be like the covenant that I made with their ancestors when I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, a covenant that they broke, though I was their husband, says the Lord. But this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, says the Lord. I will put my law within them, and I will write it on their hearts, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. No longer shall they teach one another or say to each other, know the Lord, for they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest, says the Lord. For I will forgive their iniquity and remember their sin no more.
All right. Well, so we've been talking a lot about covenants over the last few weeks, it seems like. There's a lot here. So that we're all on board, would it be helpful to go through kind of a recap of just what Jeremiah is and what he's talking about? Just gonna throwing that out there for everyone to answer. Thumbs up. Do we have an idea? All right. So Jeremiah, of course, is one of the prophets. When we think of the prophets, we're thinking of those men and women in the Old Testament who spoke on God's behalf and spoke for the Lord in specific situations, right? Moses is considered a prophet as he gives the law and brings the people out of Egypt. This is the kind of the tail end of the really hardcore Old Testament prophets. Ezekiel comes after him, but Jeremiah is there in the last days when Jerusalem is standing. To give an idea of the history, right just after 600 BC, 587 BC to be specific, Jerusalem was sacked for the first time. Now we hear about when the Romans sacked Jerusalem and tore down the temple. That was actually the second temple. It's Jeremiah's time where the first temple was destroyed. This is when the Ark of the Covenant was still in the temple. And so when we talk about the lost Ark that Indiana Jones was after, it's Jeremiah's time when it gets lost, right? So Jeremiah does not have a happy ending to it. This is right before we go into exile. And usually he is pretty grim, but this is one of the more hopeful passages that Jeremiah has. How are we taking a look at this? So
yeah, I mean, there are a couple of thoughts I have, Father Chris. One is, exactly as you said, in the context of exile, and then you see the allusion in the early on, bringing them out of the land of Egypt, the wilderness, of course, being a theme for us in Lent. And I think preachers are wise to connect wilderness to the wanderings, desert wanderings coming out, kind of helping us foreshadow the scriptures that'll find us at the Easter Vigil. I think of Robert Jensen, the late Lutheran theologian, who said God is whoever raised Jesus from the dead after first delivering Israel out of Egypt. That's super simple definition. So like this is the heart of everything. So wanting to make that connection, and then recognizing what this would mean for Jeremiah in his own time, and then the lectionary. If you look at all the lessons today, kind of collected together, if you had to play like a Bible reading game show or something and say, guess what Sunday this is, you would probably say this is the Sunday before Holy Week. So to invite folks to think about what how we see the covenant fulfilled in Jesus, and especially through the special days of Holy Week.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. We talk about a new covenant here, the new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. It's not like the covenant I made with their ancestors, the covenant that they broke.
Right.
So it leads me to ask, does each covenant supersede the one before it? It's hard to say, right? When we think about God, we think about God's promises. All of that is supposed to be eternal, right? How is it that we're looking at this, that we need a new covenant, and it won't be like the ones that were made with their ancestors when they came out of Egypt? How is it that covenants work like that?
That's a huge question, and a great question, and a question to be careful with, right? Because we don't want to like say that like Christianity replaced Judaism. That would be like the most crude version.
Right.
But it's also like a really good question. It's what Paul spends most of Romans wrestling with, right? Like, does this mean that God's given up on? By no means. And I remember having a New Testament professor, Richard Hayes, who said that's the polite version of the Greek translation. Paul says, hell no. Like it's not a replacement, it's this fulfillment. But it's a good question too, Chris. Like, so what does that mean for it? And it's not going to be like the one that they broke. So this one, is it going to be different because the people won't break it, or is it going to be unbreakable in some other way? It makes me think of Augustine, who talked about like the different stages of growing into holiness, where he talked about like you start off your we all start off and we are not able not to sin. We all sin, but then we grow in maturity to where we are able not to sin, but in the fullness of the kingdom we will not be able to sin. And so there's something that changes either in us or around us, or and I think that's a mystery.
And it goes through knowing what sin is and not wanting to do it. And then at the same time, then you grow in. Then there's that point where it doesn't occur to you to do it. Karen, you have a question. Karen,
How do you do
Sorry.
you're muted. Go ahead.
I'm so sorry. I was trying to type a message directly to you.
Oh, all I see is Father Chris.
Yeah, I was trying to type a message directly to you. The plumbers are here, and I'm going to have to leave the meeting. I didn't know when they were coming.
Oh, goodness.
So to deal with some plumbing issues. So
all right.
I'm so sorry, but I'll have
That's
to catch you all next time. Thank you.
All right. Have a good one, and we'll catch us on the video.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. All right, Holly, you've got something for us.
First of all, I'm very excited. I just figured out how to raise my hand. We're making big strides in technology here. So I just wanted to say, except now that box is covering everything. All right.
Sorry.
No, I figured it out. Wow. that what strikes me in my limited view of this is that the new covenant is just going to be so much more personal. He says you will not have to teach one another. That's not going to be the way anymore. I am going to be there with each one of you on an individual basis in your heart. And, so it's much more personal. And so which is quite different.
Yeah. And then, what's fun too, to look at this is, what is it? And I will be their God and they shall be my people. That we've heard a lot of that. That's been the last 2 weeks in our Genesis readings.
Mhm.
That is, and so it's a new covenant, but it's God doing the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So is there really only one covenant that God offers? I wonder about, certainly the covenants get more and more intimate as they go along. With Noah, it was with Adam, and with Noah, it was all of humanity. With Abraham, it was his family. And now this is a whole nation. But God is growing closer to more as it goes on. It's really, I'm having a hard time getting my head around that.
So this is I didn't raise my hand. This is, okay, here we go.
Okay.
Did I just go for it? I have to figure that out again. Here we are.
Oh, it's the same thing. You just lower it.
Oh, my hand's been up all this time. Oh my God. Sorry.
Well, you remember when we were in school, we really wanted to say something, we had to actually brace our arms to hold them up like this. Do we all remember that?
Yes. Me. So, this is, I'm sure I'm the only person here who doesn't know this, but it seems like it's about the delivery. What is the difference in the content of the covenant? And I know this is a covenant that's coming, or it sounds like that, but I will make a new covenant. Is it a new covenant with a new with a, just more personal, or is it completely different content? I don't know. Or maybe you just said that and I missed it.
I don't know that it's different content.
Saying, is it, does it replace the old covenant? If it's the same content, it's just a different medium then, not just.
Right. So there's a law, just like there was with Moses in that covenant. And instead of on stone, it will be written on their hearts. I don't know if it's this passage or it's that the song comes from and the phrase comes from, but certainly that is part of what God is saying. He's going to write the law not on stone, but in our hearts. And I think that goes to the point that Father Jonathan was making, is about how we grow into this covenant. It's, the sin we want to avoid is always the sin, but how we approach it is different as we mature in faith. And then the same, I will be their God and they will be my people, just like God does with Abraham. I think maybe not the content, but the context makes a real difference here. In the covenant with Abraham and in the covenant with Moses, right? And through Moses, all of Israel, that's actually a point where the future is pretty bright in front of them. They're coming from a place that was pretty dark and receiving a promise that of how much better things are going to be. This covenant comes when the days really are pretty dark. I mean, literally they are surrounded on all sides, and they're about to be marched out of Jerusalem in chains. And so when we hear of the covenant, that's a big difference. There's a difference in how you hear things, depending on the situation you're in. I guess, even with your spouse, to hear "I love you," as you're walking out the door in the morning, is very different from hearing "I love you," when one of your parents is dying or when you yourself are dying. I mean, they're the same words, right? But I think those are two different, very different ways of saying that and hearing it.
Right.
And I wonder how, I know how I as an individual hear that. How do people in general, like the people of God, hear that when it happens? What is that like? I mean, do we have anything corporate like that we've?
When you hear what in particular, or anything?
So the same, I will be your God, I'll be your God, and you will be my people. All right. It's one thing when you're Abraham, you're 100 years old, and you're told you're going to have a son. It is another thing when your house is about to be burned down and you're going to be taken off in chains. I mean, that's on an individual level, and yet we're speaking to a whole nation that is going to go through this.
Well, I guess I should.
Please, no, you're fine. Go ahead.
I don't know how to make everybody else.
The hand is really important when you have about 30 or 40 people.
Given the example you just provided of "I love you" when you're walking out the door to go to work for the day, or you're saying "I love you" when you're, speaking to somebody who's on their deathbed, so there's I think a pretty strong connection there that if God says, "You are my people," and I'm there, or whatever he's going to say when everything's good, he's leading you by the hand. Like, okay, great, but you kind of somewhere in the back of your head think, "I got this. Okay, fine." That whole ego thing, I'm fine. Yeah. But when you're in great need and you're desperate, well, then you are probably quite a bit more receptive to a full-on serving of love and help. So, and engaging in that because you're desperate.
Yeah.
I think there's also this beautiful point that is coming up in the conversation too, that y'all have already named. I just want to come at from a slightly different angle. The intensely personal aspect of this covenant that you were naming, and so that this one is going to sort of belong to each person uniquely, but it's not private. It doesn't undo the peopleness, if that makes sense. And so it's very personal, but not private. And in a way that the personal aspect of it kind of strengthens their common life together and their identity. And I love, Chris, how you were talking about the increasingly personal nature of the covenants. I mean, starting with all humanity and then Abraham, and it's going to get most personal for us in Christ. And yet, we know this is the light to enlighten all people. So somehow the more personal the relationship, the more open to being surprised by the strangers we find in the company of God's people. And I love that dynamic.
Yeah.
Something else that's striking me now, and Father Jonathan, I'm going to rely on you to correct me on this, is this line. I've read a lot of instances of covenant in Scripture, but I never remember prior to this, I will forgive their iniquity and remember their sin no more. We hear David ask for it in Psalm 51.
Mm-hmm.
But, so we have here a covenant that they broke, right? And so they're being, the consequences of breaking that covenant are around them. At this point, they will then have a new covenant because of that, right? So in an older covenant, was forgiveness a part of this? I mean, once the covenant is broken, can it strictly speaking, in covenant terms, once a covenant is broken, can it be repaired? And I don't remember. This seems like it's an innovation when we get to Jeremiah in the way we think about covenants.
Yeah, if it's not a wholesale innovation, because I think you're right. Like, I mean, if the covenant was completely broken the first time they broke it and it was done with it, the Bible would be a lot shorter.
Right.
So there's this kind of like implied forgiveness, but it's not clarified in this way until now.
Yeah. Well, we have a new covenant though. It's new covenant after new covenant after new covenant. From Adam to Noah to Abraham to Moses, then David, and these things. So it is. Holly, what you got for us?
Well, that is an interesting point there at the end, and I kind of take that to mean, in addition to, that on that personal level, in addition to I'm there with you, is well, it's kind of a focus on your individual sin, and that I will forgive you, the individual, for your iniquity. But also, causes you to focus some on your responsibility, your sin, and not, that's everybody. I think you take it a little more seriously when you think, oh, I really need to pay attention to my own actions and not, well, I often think in the prayers we read, we say, we, and it's easy to be like, yeah, everybody. But if you were to say I, it would be, we.
Right.
Excuse me, let me turn this off.
Sure. Well, yeah, so forgive their iniquity and remember their sins no more. Now, last week with the bronze serpents, we saw healing from the sin, right? But, the covenant having been broken, I think what we did out here last week is that because of all of the complaining against Moses and their actions as a result of that, the curse that is put on them is that generation is not allowed into the promised land. I mean, the covenant is broken and they are cut off somehow, right? As a generation, I don't think they're cut off from God's love so much, but they are cut off from the promise in that covenant of, I'll take you to a land that I will show you, right? There's the healing from the snake bite, but they are still stuck in the brokenness of the covenant. And I wonder if this is not building in a means to repair a covenant when it is broken.
Well, I see.
Just adding a clause, as it were.
To me, it also makes repentance a more personal thing, that sin is personal, then repenting is also something you can do on a personal level and not just kind of put it out there on the greater community. I don't know.
Yeah. That's, Father Jonathan, that's really interesting. Father Jonathan and I are in a reading group that meets on Tuesdays, and it is the book we're reading is called Rediscipling the White Church, and it's how we how we address the chapter we read last week was about how we address social problems, and one of those is, and one of the dangers it says is exactly what you're saying, Holly, is we, you know, we can think. How would you put it, Jonathan? You were more articulate last week than I was about it. You know where I'm going with this?
Maybe so. And feel free to steer me if it's not what you're thinking. But I mean, there is a sense in which our personal and our corporate sins are more connected than we let on or are able to see sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
But I hear what you're saying, Holly. Like sometimes when, as like growing up, I heard the confession of sin on Sunday, and I thought, oh, thank goodness, I don't have to do like a confession. This counts for all. Like it's like this blanket, and we can stay abstract and all that kind of stuff. And so the invitation to get personal with my sin and is a more honest thing, and I can feel the assurance of God's forgiveness exactly because I've spoken it out loud and had someone else hear it. But I can't think that that I'm aware of all my sin or that all of my sin is individual. There are these structural pieces that take the whole community to be able to see and name and repent of together. I think of the great tension that Ash Wednesday sets up for us every single year. You get these two readings that could not be more opposite, right? Like Jesus saying like, hey, if you want to be seen by God, go into your room, close the door, say your prayers, don't tell anyone else. And then you get your choice of either like Isaiah and Joel, sound the trumpet, gather the people, that all of this belongs together. So like with respect to like racism that Chris was alluding to, like I can't do that repentance by myself, but I have to be able to locate myself in it. So that it's got this kind of twofold part to it.
Mm-hmm.
And I also, just to kind of follow up on your point, Chris, about that last line, obviously Jeremiah is not necessarily directly anticipating it, inspired by the Spirit, but it's just impossible for Christians, I think, to get to that last line without thinking about the Eucharist we share every week and Jesus calling the new covenant, holding up the chalice over the altar, saying these words by heart every week, the new covenant for the forgiveness of sins, and that covenant, Jeremiah is definitely in the background for Jesus, just as the suffering servant passages of Isaiah are, and for the New Testament writers as they try to wrestle with what Jesus's life, death, and resurrection mean for Israel, but also those beyond Israel.
I like that a lot because I mean, there's a tension in the Eucharist there as well, vis-a-vis. You know, it is a sacrament, and all sacraments are sacraments of healing, right? All of them restore us somehow. But we also have this tension where we are told not to approach the altar if we find ourselves in sin. And so come for the forgiveness of sins, drink this cup for the forgiveness of sins, but not if you have any sins. It's kind of almost how we that's going on in our mind, and there's got to be a resolution to that somehow.
And the biggest sin, says St. Paul, is to come not discerning the body. And in the context that writing to the Corinthians, that was like, hey, I'm going to drink all the wine and not see the poor folks next to me. So there again, it's that same tension again, this like thing that we encounter oftentimes as an individual act of personal piety. In the scriptures over and over again saying, no, personal does not mean private. You belong to each other because you belong to God.
Yeah. Well, and I guess that you can't as a part of the kingdom of Judah, you can't repent for all the idol worship if you're not worshiping idols, right? You can rail against it and say, guys, this is a really bad idea, and yet you're still stained by it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, is your hand still up for?
Oh, yes, it is.
Good.
I hate to just be a hog on the talking here,
no, by all means.
It's a very, for me, very interesting thought-provoking point that Father Melton makes about that tension between personal and community sin and our responsibility. And I'm trying to wrap my head around it. So the example you gave of racism, I get that. That makes sense. Can you give another example so I can really cement wrapping my thoughts around this to understand sort of, well, that's, the same thing, are the relevance of that community sin and how we have to be part of that too. Not, okay.
There's one example, and I don't know if it's on the same level, Holly, as the racism, but one from the scriptures that comes to mind is a favorite story where they're trying to trap Jesus in paying taxes to Caesar, and everything hangs in the balance for Jesus depending on how he answers this question, right? And he kind of plays dumb. He's like, "Well, show me the coin," and they hand him a coin, and it's breaking the law already for them to have the coin. So even though like they have the right position in their, because it's a graven image, it's a graven image of the emperor on the coin. And so even though they're not advocating for being oppressed and all this stuff, they're part of this system, and their dishonesty is exposed exactly to the extent that they would pretend that they can trap Jesus in this and that they're not a part of it. So they're recognizing the way they belong to this thing, that maybe even like confessing it as sin isn't even the right way to think about it, but just acknowledging it through lament of like, this is broken. We know this is not the way God would have us be, and there's not anything we can do about it, and it breaks our hearts. I think that's one of the great gifts of the collect that comes with this reading today. We're not saying like, oh gosh, God, we just don't do good enough job cleaning ourselves up. You alone can bring into order the unruly wills and affections of sinners. So we don't have to like be shy of saying like, God, we don't know how to get out of this, and not knowing how to get out of this doesn't make it less wrong. It just, right. it allows us to surrender ourselves in a different kind of way.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. That was good. That was very helpful. Thank you.
It's interesting. We're getting paired with the Psalm 51, which is the most personal of them, I think. It's "Have mercy on me." And this is the one that the Miserere, that is it Mozart's that is so lovely, that has been the soundtrack for so many things. But yeah, it's a very personal look, and it is a look at sin, but it's anticipating this forgiveness as well. How to, cleansing and all that. We're 38 minutes in, and be mindful of our time. Let's move forward let's take a look at the gospel. We can come back to these two, but I do want us to know that, have some of this in mind. So this is from the Gospel of John in chapter 12. And so now, among those who went up to worship at the festival were some Greeks. They came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida in Galilee, and said to him, "Sir, we wish to see Jesus." Philip went and told Andrew. Then Andrew and Philip went and told Jesus. Jesus answered them, "The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Very truly, I tell you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains just a single grain. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. Those who love their life lose it, and those who hate their life in this world will keep it for eternal life. Whoever serves me must follow me, and where I am, there will my servant be also. Whoever serves me, the Father will honor. Now my soul is troubled. And what should I say? Father, save me from this hour. No, it is for this reason that I have come to this hour. Father, glorify your name." Then a voice came from heaven. "I have glorified it, and I will glorify it again. The crowd standing there heard it and said that it was thunder. Others said, an angel has spoken to him. Jesus answered, this voice has come for your sake, not for mine. Now is the judgment of this world. Now the ruler of this world will be driven out. And I, when I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all people to myself. He said this to indicate the kind of death he was to die. So it's an interesting pairing there. We've talked about, the covenant God makes with his people, and the first people here are not covenant people. The first people we meet in this gospel are in fact Greeks. Just a reminder of, so where we are in the first century, Greek has become the language of the entire Mediterranean world. Latin is what the Romans spoke, but if they wanted to be understood anywhere outside of Rome, they spoke Greek, and often in Rome they spoke Greek that way as well. But these are the Greek culture kind of took over the entire Mediterranean, much like the Persian culture tried to do. So everybody is speaking Greek. So we don't know whether these are Jewish people who just speak Greek. There's the idea that the proselytes are Greeks who have come into contact with Judaism, understand its philosophy, understand its covenants, and want to be a part of it. And so they convert to Judaism. So we don't know if these are those Greeks or whether they are full-on pagan Greeks, but it's interesting that they are the ones coming to worship at this festival. And what's drawing them? These are not the covenant people that we've been talking about this whole time.
Yeah, and it doesn't seem that he really addresses that aspect in his response, Jesus's response, unless you read, whoever serves me, the Father will honor, as including the Greek God-fearers.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. They go to Philip first. They go to the one with the most obvious Greek name, right?
Right.
Philip, Alexander's the Great's father, but it means the lover of horses, right? Because that's what Macedonians were known for. Philip is that name that became, kind of like John throughout, like it is in our culture. And then Philip then goes to the next guy with a completely Greek name, which is Andrew. And so they are the ones who go to Jesus. And I think you're right. There is that is there whoever serves me must follow me, and there will our servants be. But I think it speaks too of how we what does it take for us to come to God? What does it take for us to come to Jesus? The Greeks obviously feel like they need an introduction somehow. I wonder how that. Of course, Philip is the intermediary for a lot of people. He was he was the one who brought Nathaniel in, right, back in chapter 2 of John. And so, yeah, he's talking about it's a the response it's kind of like we hear with Paul. We hear all of Paul's answers in his letters, but we never hear any of the questions. So trying to put together what Paul's saying sometimes is really difficult. And I'm finding this a little difficult to say. This is obviously an answer to some question. What is the question that is being asked? I'm
I don't know if this is the question to that answer, but when I look at this passage, one of the questions that comes to my mind is, especially set up by the Greeks' desire to see Jesus, what does the glory of God look like? So I'm reading this and I'm seeing lots of echoes of the snakes in the wilderness story, right? Like, which is not inappropriate because John has already told us, like he's brought that in. So we're not just like bringing that out of anywhere. Jesus sees himself as, so they want an introduction, but they say we wish to see Jesus, and then Jesus at the end of it is going to say, when I am lifted up from the earth. And when I was a kid, I heard that and I was like, glory. This is like revelation. He's talking about being put on a cross, and he's talking about becoming the snake on the pole. And through that, he's going to draw all people to himself. So that's going to be healing for Israel, but it's also going to involve all people to himself. And then just in case John anticipates some preacher being accused of taking it too far, so he just like confirms that in the next sentence. He says, he said this in order to indicate the kind of death he was to die.
Yeah.
All of this just feels like a heart-wrenching but beautiful setup for Holy Week. Like, this is, you guys have been following me for 3 years with this idea of what glory looks like. It's time for the Son of Man to be glorified. Very truly, I tell you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies.
Yeah. And this is kind of, we've come over the last hill of the roller coaster that this gospel is. I think at this point, is there anything that happens in Luke? Is this where the last discourse starts? It seems like it is. So we've already risen. In chapter chapter 12, we already start out 6 days before the Passover. We've already risen Lazarus from the grave, and we're a few verses away. This is I think there's a cutoff here between the paragraphs. I think the second paragraph really actually starts the last discourse. So if you're not familiar with that, in the Gospel of John, where you have the Last Supper, there's this last discourse that John has where he doesn't talk about the Eucharist so much, because he has the entire bread of life discourse in chapters 6 through 8, I believe, which we'll hear in the summertime because it's year B. But this is it's almost like Deuteronomy for the gospel, right? This is, Moses gives his last summary of everything, and then in John's gospel, Jesus tries to sum everything up. This is when he starts. This is when he, this is his hour, and so he's reminding them of everything. And what we'll see as it goes on, it's right after this Jesus washes people's feet. It's right after this he says, "I'm the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." Holly, what you got?
Well, this is a very nitpicky question, and I don't mean to,
Please.
In the trees instead of the forest, but in the first paragraph, those who love their life lose it. I totally get that. And then kind of makes sense. There's the converse. Those who hate their life in this world will keep it for eternal life. So I'm kind of wondering what exactly we mean by hate their life. Is this remorse for sin? Is this the the troubled soul over the horrible things that people can do, like crucify somebody, or all the other horrible things all of us as humans can do? Or what exactly does this mean? Sorry, I know that you don't want to be attached to the worldly things, that you're ready to go, but being willing to go versus hate seem like two different things.
Okay, so I grabbed my Greek and I'm going to botch this.
Okay.
But I'm going to try. So we have loving the one loving his soul, the psyche, his existence, he'll be loosened from it, apoluai. But the one mison, hating, is what it says. This is the same, it's the same root that we get things like misanthropy and misogyny. It's a hatred, but it's not that vicious hatred. It's an antipathy, really, that alienates you from something, right? If I'm a misanthrope or a misogynist, I wouldn't necessarily hate women the way we think that I hate Auburn, right? Because we all do. So, but there's just this antipathy, right? It's not given any account. And it is the life in this world that we have that mison about, that there's not a really good English word to describe that, unless
is it like distaste for something, or I don't know.
Well, I don't know. So, a lot of misogynists are married to very lovely women, and that's the only word I can think of that uses this root. And Father Melton, maybe you can help me with that, but I don't keep up with my Greek like I ought to, and so whenever I try to do this, it usually leads us down a rabbit hole.
I appreciate your taking the stab at it, because I don't have any Greek insights there in that line. I think you pointed out, Chris, really helpfully, it's not hate their life, period. It's hate their life in this world, and that's a big thing for John, who it kind of inspires the idea of like the resident alien. Mm-hmm. So we are a resident alien. We don't belong here, and then also just to keep in mind, like, this is for those who follow Jesus, but it all is also primarily, firstly, describing Jesus, because he's saying the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified, which isn't to say Jesus hates his life in this world, but it is to say, unless a grain of, so we can interpret that verse through what we are going to see in the days ahead, Jesus' own anguish, his prayer in the garden to be spared that cup, if possible, but nevertheless thy will be done. So I read this and I get this sense that, like, hating one's life in the world is to keep from clinging to the ways of this world.
Okay.
And to be willing to surrender that, even when it looks like death. All
right. Well, that's that word hate kind of struck me as strong, but sort of just longing to go where you really belong.
It's so important, because most of us, I think it's such an important thing to clarify for folks, because most of us don't need the gospel to be inclined towards self-loathing, right? Like, that's not new, and most of us are really struggling with that in all kinds of ways. And at the heart of the gospel is this underlying message that all of the lies of not being enough, either for God or ourselves or those we love, are not the truest things about us. So I think it's a really great question you bring up, and it's not hate in the sense that well, this must be of God because it makes me feel miserable, which I think has been a real misunderstanding, preached and received in the life of the church for a long time.
Yeah, there's it's interesting. This is one of those passages that usually John is the one who tap dances around, strong statements a lot of times. So you get a lot of the light and dark imagery, and there's a lot of strong stuff in John. But you think when you think about being direct and to the point, you think of Mark, and Mark says those it's couched in those who lay down their life for their friends, right? The laying down your life is tap dancing a lot more than hate your life in this world. right? There is, yeah, and I think there's something there, you know, about what we are to. Of course, if all your life is in this world, yeah, I think about how, you know, you and I, Father, we help people a lot as they approach the end of their lives, and there's a very different sense between people who are very afraid of dying and those who aren't, and what that means for different people. I think all of us are on some level, and all of us, you know, at different times as we approach death, we have that sense of clinging on. But when we do, that makes death really a horrifying thing. Whereas the resurrection and the promise of it is something that you know, you can intellectually assent to it all your life, and then you get confronted with it, and you have to go through, you know, we help people through this process of, okay, I've been saying I believe this all these years, now it's real. It's a very it's heart-wrenching to watch, and that doesn't mean that you and I are going to be immune from that. I mean, you're younger than I am. You're probably going to be at my deathbed, right? That's going to be something you're going to have to walk me through as well.
I think that's such a great point, Chris. And you see people dying and walk with people who are dying, and it makes it. And I've collected their observations about things. Like, I remember a dear friend, Evelyn, who was 90. I would visit her in a nursing home, and one day she came and she always started our conversations with, "Father, it's so good to see you." And I'd say, "How are you?" She's like, "I'm grateful." She was always grateful. She was in the same little apartment thing in the nursing home, looking out the same window, couldn't get out of bed, but she was always grateful. One day I came in and she said she was grateful. And she said, "But I have a question." She said, "Father Jonathan, why would he take this from me?" And I said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "Well, I love to knit, but I can't knit anymore. My fingers are arthritis at my age." And I looked around the room, it was covered with stuff that I then recognized as her knitting. And she wasn't afraid of dying, but she just didn't understand having to lose everything that she thought made her who she was and that she had enjoyed. And I think that's part of what Lent can be practiced for us in, sort of being given the gift of dying before we die. I remember a friend who was telling me she went to a spiritual director for advice prior to a Lent, and said, "You know, I don't have any of the usual things. Like, I don't smoke. I'm not going to give up cigarettes for Lent. I don't really, chocolate doesn't do it for me. What do you suggest I give up for Lent?" And the spiritual director looked at her and said, "Well, you're an author, right?" And she is. She's a famous author. And she said, "Yeah, that's my life. That's my livelihood." She said, what if you gave up reading for Lent?" And her response, I don't know how the whole story went because I wasn't in the room, but I imagine her response as something like when Jesus asked the rich young ruler, "Yeah, what if you gave up that money? Like, what is the thing that you hang your identity on, that if you were to lose, you wouldn't be anything? And could you put that aside if it made room for the promise of the new life, which is that trust that can hold you even in death?" The trust, and for Christians, and to go back to that idea of covenant, the baptismal covenant sealed by the Holy Spirit and baptism, marked as Christ's own, God's love for you as the most true thing about you. What are all the ways in this life we are discipled without our knowing it, which connects to what you're talking about with the rediscipling the white church. One of the parts of that conversation is we are discipled in lots of ways. An author, Jamie Smith, talks about malls. Malls are not as popular anymore because we're in a pandemic, but malls are kind of like the temple of our culture. You send your kids there, they get discipled. So what are all the ways we get discipled to mistrust the truth about the identity that is ours through the covenant baptism? And what would it mean to die to that before we died? And I think that's what Lent means to be for us.
Wow. That's great. And that is a perfect way to cap our hour. There is a lot more that is coming to my mind. I'm going to have to go do a lot of studying before I put something together for you on Sunday. Father Jonathan, I thank you so much for joining us, and I'll look forward to having you again. This has been a lot of fun for us here, and I hope it's been edifying for all of you who are joining us. If you are joining us online, I encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel, St. Christopher's YouTube channel. And when you've done that, click on that little bell icon and you will get a notice every time we're putting something new up. We'll look forward to seeing you in the future. If you are also joining us and you are particularly blessed by this ministry, I encourage you to consider supporting us using one of the links that is in the description of the video below. And we'll look forward to seeing you again soon. Father Jonathan, will you close us in prayer, please?
I absolutely glad to. I also just want to say thank you, Father Chris, for the invitation. This has been a gift for me too. Thank you all for having me. And my good friend and our administrator at Holy Trinity, when she found out I'd be doing this with y'all on St. Patrick's Day, I told her, I don't have any green. I have an outfit that doesn't have any green. She gave me this. We didn't really have a good time to wear it. So before the prayer, it has flashing lights and everything, but she said, here, Father Jonathan, I got you covered. So I don't know if you all can see the little, there they go.
Yeah, I've got an orange shirt that I'm going to change back into right after this because we're, of course, Protestants, right?
So the prayer I want to share with y'all is, it's in morning and evening prayer, but it's the collect for Fridays. It's a wonderful prayer as we gather to the last days here before Holy Week begins. The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
Let us pray. Almighty God, whose most dear Son went not up to joy, but first he suffered pain, and entered not into glory before he was crucified. Mercifully grant that we, walking in the way of the cross, may find it none other than the way of life and peace. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Well, thank you, everyone. And if I don't see you before, have a wonderful and blessed Holy Week and a joyful Easter. And I'll look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today.
Thank you, and thank you, Father. Got a lot out of it.
Bye.
All right. Have a good day, everyone.